Namaskar, this is my 34th lecture, and before we proceed on to the feminist theory of conversion, we have to talk about something else in addition. So I want to talk about the kinship structure. In my previous videos, we said how the kinship structure actually is the reason why these intermarriages were happening. So the Muslim communities were Zongas, they were outsiders, and they were not part of, in Africa, also in the subcontinent, not part of the majority community. One of the ways is intermarriage. There were other ways of becoming healers, advisors, trading. Trading is a big thing. When we trade, we are in relationship to each other. But trading, and I said this with Levi Strauss, that doesn't establish permanent bondage. So blood relationship can only be established through marriage, because now we share the blood, we share grandchildren. And for Levi Strauss, in my previous lecture, I said that's the main thing by which tribal societies used to bond. So marriage is really the transaction of women between tribes to establish that bondage. And that's why all these kings, whether in the subcontinent or in Africa, they're married. We can't call that love jihad. It was open. There was no deception, because love jihad implies deception. But before I go further into conversion and so forth, I want to talk about something else, which is why part of the iconoclast is also part of the conversion, because in societies prior to what we have as industrial capitalism, there was no such thing. The distinction between the sacred and the secular was fuzzy. But let's first try to analyze what this means. So we talked about Marx. Marx's base and superstructure. Society, according to Marx, moves through the contradiction between the base and the superstructure. And we talked about all of this earlier. Modes of production, relations of production, which can be tribal, agricultural, feudal, or capitalist. That's in the base level, which is the moving part of society, causality, because Marx was working under the Enlightenment and he tried to copy the model of Newton, Galileo, natural science into society. He tried to understand why society moves. It moves through the contradiction between the base and the superstructure. What is in the superstructure? State, civil society, and religious institutions. So the religious institutions are a reflection in Marxian theory of the fundamental mode of production. Here, Marx made a mistake which feminist theories have pointed out. And we have to understand that. Linda Nicholson, a feminist theorist, said that where Marx's mistake is, he separated kinship structure, that is when societies are glued together through marriage, from economics. But kinship is economics. I am exchanging my daughter with you and getting in return title, land. In England, it used to happen. The old aristocracies, they would give their daughter to wealthy bourgeoisies, which is the new class. And they got the grandchildren got the title from the old aristocracy and the money from the bourgeoisies. And also in ancient India, the intermarriages between Brahmins and Kshatriyas for the purpose, well, one could say kinship structures or economics, because what Linda Nicholson showed is that the base and superstructure of Marx is the kinship structure in all societies, tribal, agricultural, feudal. It's only in capitalism when the market spread. Now everything is market. We buy food from the market. We buy clothes. People used to sew their clothes at home. Kinship became part of the superstructure. Now it's no longer an organizing force of society, but it's an organized force of society. It's no longer the base, but it's in the superstructural level. We have to understand the transaction of women. For example, the indigenous, whether it's the Native American woman or the Hindu woman or the indigenous African woman, in the context, it was also an economic relationship. Now, iconoclast, breaking of temples. See why I think both the left and the right discourse, both of them are only partial. In the left discourse, the breakage of the temple, the motive was purely economic. So it was secular motive. If we read through, we'll see that, whether it's the Incan temple or the temple at Multan, etc. Somnath temple, it's all economic, purely economic, which is the Marxist interpretation, because the moving basis of society is modes of production, relations of production. According to the nationalist discourse, it's all sacred, it's the breaking of our dharma and so forth. Actually, both of them, they don't make sense, because what they're doing is they're again going back to the same narrative that the secular and the sacred were different. They were not, especially in indigenous religions like Hinduism, or what we know today as Sanatana Dharma, and indigenous cultures, the Aztec, the Mayans. The secular was the sacred. The temple was the place not only for worship, but also economics. Everything is sacred. I'm trading that sacred. I'm exchanging that sacred. I'm giving my daughter to you, which is also exchange. Marriage is exchange. That's also is sacred. Everything is sacred. So there's a very interesting thing that I'll read out later. It's like, in these natural, more primitive religions, and the word primitive is not good, but I just used it in terms of time. One cannot make a distinction between sacred and secular, just as one cannot make a distinction between one's identity and one's faith identity. One's faith identity and one's identity, they are the same. For example, you ask a Zulu, what's your religion? I'm a Zulu. That's his ethnicity, and that's also his dharmic identity. The same with Sanatana Dharma. I am a Buddhist, I am a Vaishnavite. That's my identity, and that's also my ethnicity to some extent. And that distinction between the sacred and the secular is, we have to think that there is no distinction. The temples were places of exchange, market, oikos, my first lecture, and they are also places of worship. Everything is sacred, and the karma is every karma is sacred. Everything, the land sacred. That's the other lecture that I have to do before I go into more detail on conversion, because conversion is also a feminist issue. Conversion also will involve the way land was looked at by pre-Islamic, pre-Christian, pre-modern cultures. It was not a thing to be exchanged. It was not a market thing, and I talked about this earlier. So in this context, we have to understand the whole thing. Iconoclast does not mean either it's completely secular, like the Marxists would say, it's all economics, because that's his whole structure, base and superstructure, nor is it completely sacred, because the distinction between the sacred and the secular, they're the same. So whether I'm trading with you, I'm giving you coconut, you're giving me oil, I'm giving you rice, you're giving me wheat, or I'm giving you my daughter to establish the kinship, which Levi Strauss says is the most fundamental exchange. It's all sacred, and everything is a market. But the market is not in our sense. For us, market, see, Adam Smith said that it's only in capitalism that the market spread, and we have separated the private and the public. This is also why the Western notion of secularism doesn't work. And that's another lecture that I have to do before again I come to conversion. So all these we're building up. So far for this lecture, that is all. Namaskar. Again, subscribe, like, comment, and please go to our website, sowaka.in. All my writings are there, my blogs on genocide, and will shortly be giving also a course on genocide. I'll talk about it more in my next video lecture. Thank you.